Hello and welcome to GCV's new webinar series, The Next Wave, which we have under the motto of Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gained. And as you may notice, we have a new logo for the series. We're very, very excited about it. My name is Cal, and I'm delighted to be co-hosting today's session along with our editor, Maya Palmer. Hi, Maya. Welcome.
Hi, Cal.
Really excited about this one.
This is my very first GCV webinar, so very exciting for me.
Lovely, lovely. And our new webinar series, the Next Wave, will be a combination of webinars focused on professional development for CVCs on the one hand, and on areas that CVC investors are interested to invest in on the other. And today's session is going to be more of the latter type, and we have entitled it Combating Climate Change, the Role of Insurtech, because this is the exciting topic we have selected for today. But before we dive into it, I need to make the explicit disclaimer that no part of this presentation is to be construed as investment advice under any shape or form whatsoever. The purpose of the session is purely informative. And now I'm going to turn over to Maya, who briefly introduced our panelists for today.
Yeah, so no, I'm really excited about this, Cal, because we have a really great panel representing a lot of different viewpoints on this problem. So Steve Bernardez from Avanta Ventures bringing in that kind of real frontline insurance company perspective. You know, they're based in California, dealing with a lot of fire risk, amongst other things. Peter Ortez, on the other hand, from Munich Re Ventures, comes in with that reinsurer point of view. So really interested to hear how that differs in terms of what he's looking at. Then Kevin Stein and Matt Stein, not related, but Kevin Stein from Delos Insurance is one of the portfolio companies from Avanta Ventures, looking at a really new way of calculating fire risk. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And Matt Stein from Salient Predictions. I mean, this is, again, I'm fascinated to hear, Matt, how this even works, but it's using sort of measurements of seawater to make some really long-term weather predictions. So I'm not going to say too much here because the panelists will tell you a lot more, better than I can. So let's just have a little recap before we get to the panel discussion bit about why Insurtech and climate change is just such a crucial issue today.
Thanks, Maya. As this pitch book chart here that I've selected shows, over the past decade, and especially the latter half of it, we've seen the rise of Insurtech in the VC space. And this is true both in the case of number of deals as well as in total estimated dollars that have increased multifold over the period, with last year, 2021, being basically the record one, or a particularly strong one. And it is much the same story when we look at clean tech or climate tech investments. As this pitch book chart shows, VC investors' interest spiked and reached pretty much record highs by the end of last year. And here, of course, the big question of today's webinar is, where do climate and clean tech meet with Insurtech? And I think Maya's got some relevant data points on that one.
Yeah, well, I think this next chart, which is really depressing, but it tells the story pretty clearly. I mean, it's looking at the increase over time of insured losses, and not only do we see those kind of really outsized events like the hurricanes in 2017 or the earthquakes in 2011, but over time that number just creeping upwards, which tells you about why this is such a kind of crucial survival issue for the industry. And also the other thing that really kind of stood out for me here is just, you can see that it's predominantly that green line there, which is the weather related risk, which is growing. So it's really, this is kind of what we want to look at and sort of explore today, to see, like, what are the solutions to this, for the industry and for people, for sort of the general public who want to insure themselves and protect themselves. What are some of those solutions? So enough of the kind of scene setting. I'd really love to hear what the panel have to say. So I'm going to hand over to you, Cal, to kick us off.
Yeah, so let's start. Let me just stop sharing the screen. and let's start over with the proper panel discussion. Let's jump right into it. I'm going to start off with a question for Steve. So, Steve, please introduce yourself, Avanta Ventures, your broader corporate organization, and tell us how climate change has been impacting your business and how it has shaped your investment approach.
Thanks, Cal. I'm happy to do that. So Avanta Ventures is CSAA Insurance Group's corporate venture arm. CSAA Insurance Group is one of the AAA insurers. So you think about auto and home policies. My parent company insures mostly personal consumers in those areas in 23 different states and Washington, D.C. We, as Avanta, look to insource innovation from startup communities into what is basically a 90-year-old home and auto insurance carrier, while also generating venture returns, hopefully. Over that 90 years, CSAA has seen a lot of catastrophes. They're a fact of life, but as Maya's chart shows, it's definitely going up and to the right in terms of frequency and severity for carriers. In 2021, there were $92 billion in catastrophe losses in the US alone. It's hard to not turn on the TV and see Hurricane Ian damages, wildfire dollar damages, ice storms in Texas. It's almost unavoidable every season to see escalating losses occur. In 2018 alone, there were $12 billion in wildfire losses in my backyard in California. This is compared to premiums from a home perspective of $9 billion. So, not using the word existential, but this is a challenging market for insurers, and we're forced to adopt new approaches across our business, from mitigation to risk selection to how we handle claims, first notice of loss, kind of all up and down the insurance value chain. We need to be prepared to handle these challenges. If you look at the dynamics in California, carriers dropped tens of thousands of homeowners in the Sierra foothills, which is kind of the area prone to burning, forcing policyholders into a state managed or mandated insurance pool, and often their experience was to see their policy double or grow even more from a price perspective. A lot of carriers left or curtailed the business they were doing in the state. That's starting to recover a little bit. The big losses of 2017 and 2018 are we haven't replicated that most recently. But the risk remains. We are in a historic drought, and getting that, handling that risk is paramount.
I see. And the high sort of combined ratio you mentioned in those specific years. So has that driven you to invest in any particular kind of technologies, any particular kind of areas to sort of mitigate that, whether it's by calculating risk or whether it's preventing risk?
It has. If there were two big buckets, one would be risk mitigation, so preventing risk, and the other is risk selection. It's better, from my perspective, to be more active on the risk selection part, because then you have to worry a little bit less about the risk mitigation part or further down the line. My parent company does a lot on the risk mitigation side. We've partnered with a private company called Wildfire Defense Services that will actually, it's almost like a private firefighting unit that will go out and protect our policyholders. We work with a private company that will spray fire retardant on homes in high risk areas, right? Kind of as needed. We've even worked on building a smart probe that can tell when fire temperatures are approaching and automatically release retardant, things like that. Mm-hmm. But really, risk selection is probably the more leveraged part of the space to invest in. We have a number of companies in the space. So I won't steal Kevin's thunder here. So Kevin here is the CEO of Delos Insurance. They have a very interesting wildfire prediction model, and the ability to understand that risk, identify properties that are less at risk, even if they're in what would generally be considered a high-risk zone, and help us underwrite them profitably. We have a company called Cape Analytics that uses computer vision on drone or fixed wing or any type of aerial imagery to estimate the risk of properties from the air. So they can look at the roof condition. They can look at has the homeowner cut all the greenery away from their home, and do they have other things like trampolines in their yard, which are risk indicators for other reasons. We have a company called Kin that is an insurance company focused on catastrophe areas. They're going through basically, so they have a focus in Florida right now. And so they've managed to underwrite accurately in Florida for weather-based risk. And so they're doing well despite Hurricane Ian. And so it's those types of companies that both either can partner with us directly, or we can kind of learn from as a corporate venture arm and with a parent that is a carrier on how to do things in kind of a new way. And all of those have been really valuable for CSA.
I see, and I assume you guys have had the corporate mothership partner with most, if not all, of these that you've listed here.
That's exactly right. At the end of the day, that's the punchline for Avanta Ventures. I'll be honest, we can return venture returns, on every fund, but that's not really going to move the needle for the parent company. What they really need to do is manage their core business better with more innovative solutions sourced from the startup ecosystem that Avanta works with.
All right. So that's all very, very interesting and insightful. Now, before I turn to Peter, I would like to remind everyone in the audience that they can submit their questions via the Q&A button function on Zoom, and we will try to get to your questions. Now, Peter, could you please introduce yourselves and tell us about how the reinsurer's approach is a little different to all of this, and how climate change has been shaping the investment approach of Munich Re Ventures in that sense?
Sure. Hi, Cal. Thanks to you and the rest of the GCV for having me on today. So I'm Peter Ortez. I'm a senior associate at Munich Re Ventures, or what I'll call MRV. I've been, here for about 3 years, and my focus, really started out with, what we started to call energy transition about 3 years ago, looking at all the ways we can move from a fossil fuel-based economy to one powered by renewables. And that's morphed over the last 3 years to this all-encompassing kind of term of climate tech. And I think what's been really exciting is to see this sector emerge from something that was a little bit more obscure a couple of years ago to now, almost an asset class on its own. So within MRV, we are the corporate venture arm of Munich Re. Munich Re is a German reinsurer founded, I think, in 1880 that has a massive global footprint and is one of the leading insurers and reinsurers globally. And for those of you a little less familiar, reinsurance can be thought of in some ways as insurance for insurers, right? We try to mitigate the risks that, especially the geographic risks that some of these insurers are taking. And we were really founded and born of the world of natural disasters and catastrophes. If you trace insurance and reinsurance back, you can find its roots in the fire brigades in London and Europe in the 19th century. And Munich Re really got sort of its name out there as the sole insurer after the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 that was able to remain solvent after paying out its losses. So this world of balancing risks is and especially those that are natural disasters is kind of core to our business. So taking a step closer to MRV, our goal is to go out and invest in those companies and technologies that are impacting the broader risk transfer world. Because we're a reinsurer, that's a pretty large mandate. And so for us, we have kind of 5 main focus areas: Insurtech, both P&C and life and health; cybersecurity, IoT, transportation, and lastly, what the relevant one here is climate tech. And within climate, we overlap quite a bit with the Insurtech piece there. And so, this topic is super critical, right? We the chart you showed, clearly shows the losses, creeping up and dramatically, and the frequency and severity of these events occurring more often. I think the other thing that's interesting to note is, that showed insured losses, but, our models show something like 57% of losses in 2021 were uninsured. And so there's, an interest and a desire to make sure that we have all of these risks mitigated across the world. And again, as things get, more frequent and more challenging and more harmful, everything from fires to hurricanes to floods, it's a critical problem. And so, our goal is to go out and invest in both the solutions and the mitigations to climate change, but also on the climate side, we're taking a broad look. We want to go out and invest in those companies and technologies that are, taking fossil fuels out of the equation to try to reduce and potentially reverse the impact of climate change. Our parent is interested in everything from, carbon capture and use to writing performance guarantees on green technologies. We have a large asset management group that's interested in backing, infrastructure projects. I think we just made an announcement the other day that we're no longer, going to be spending a lot of time looking at oil and gas and coal. So we're interested in moving along that path towards focusing on those technologies that are, in 50 years, 100 years, going to have a massive impact on our emissions. I think we have to look at this holistically. So, with Munich Re Ventures in particular, we've invested in all sides of the challenge, right? We've got folks like Matt and his, great company we're excited to hear more about, Salient, that is focused on, understanding new weather patterns and challenges that'll bring on. But we also have invested in folks like a company called Zanskar that is, creating an AI treasure map for geothermal resources to try to move us away from, oil and gas to more renewable sort of forms of energy. And then we also have invested in, how do we solve the carbon problem? So we have a portfolio company called 12 that's taking captured CO2 and turning it into useful industrial chemicals. And so we can create, hopefully the dream is carbon, low carbon or no carbon jet fuel or carbon negative plastics, replacing these dirty industries that we've been, attached to and, leveraging fully for the last several decades, and turning them into green sources of hopefully carbon removal. So, our investment focus,
thesis.
Our investment focus is broad and focused on tackling a lot of different parts of the climate challenge. I think Steve did a great job in describing sort of all the ways that, more disasters are impacting insurers, and it's a lot of the same challenges for reinsurers, right? We've got to, use our pricing models and our risk analytics to just sort of understand where our big challenges are and do our best to balance the portfolio.
All right, that's all very insightful. Once again, before we move on to the startups and Maya, I would like to remind everyone in the audience that if you have any questions, feel free to submit them via the chat Q&A function of Zoom. And now over to you, Maya, and let's hear from the startups, from the entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I mean, it was actually really interesting to hear how the differences, in terms of, that there can be this kind of broad and approach in terms of really tackling the root of the problem, and then there can be that very specific approach. And so, anyway, I'm interested in diving into that. So, maybe starting with you, Kevin, to tell us a little bit about how does Delos Insurance, I think when we had a kind of prep call for this, you were really talking about upending the way that, the insurance industry works. So, tell us the vision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that. I'm not sure upending, maybe going a little bit far, but look, the way we look at it is that this is about climate adaptation first, right? If we look at when we started the company, so I'm co-founder of Delos Insurance. For those of you that don't know us, we are a home insurance, property insurance, commercial and personal lines, writing home insurance in California. predominantly in what others believe is wildfire areas, and we've sort of recognized are not necessarily wildfire areas. We are a partnership between an MGA and a full environmental think tank of 100 professors, researchers, postdocs, scientists that have been the go-to group of academics for civil government for 25 years. They work with CAL FIRE, they work with U.S. Forestry Service, the Public Utilities Commission, they do climate predictions for state and federal government. They get paid tens of millions, if not more, from government entities to build all of their models. They are, some of the foremost experts in this field. The way that we look at it, Delos Insurance looks at the issue of climate change. When we started the company in 2017, everybody sort of looked at what we were doing and said, hey, especially when it comes to wildfire, that's a problem that we need to avoid happening in 60 years. And we said, no, we're pretty sure this is a problem right now. This is early 2017. Then the Tubbs and Thomas fire hit, then the Camp Fire hit in 2018. Everybody said, wildfire is too big of a problem. It's unpredictable. We didn't see that coming, so nobody saw it coming. That's the way that works. And we sort of looked at it and said, we're just going to continue on doing what we're doing. What we need to, climate mitigation is incredibly important. Also, climate adaptation is incredibly important. We need to be able to understand climate risks right now, because this is happening. The last 5 years, the last 15 years for hurricane have showed us that this is unavoidable, and we need to come to a very good understanding of climate risks right away in order to make sure that we understand what is exposed, what is not exposed, how to build profitable portfolios, keep this industry, which is incredibly important, absolutely necessary when it comes to ensuring risks in climate areas. We need to keep them in climate areas. We can't live in a world where insurance companies and reinsurers look at a certain type of climate risk and say, hey, I don't understand that, or that's not predictable, and therefore we can't do it.
Can I just, because what I wanted to sort of find out a bit more about, like, what do you do then that kind of wasn't possible before, or what others haven't done? And is it because some things have become possible with, technology or certain models that you're using?
So to discuss our modeling a little bit, it's sort of a different, the way I look at it, it's a different paradigm of risk modeling. So we have our own geospatial AI engine. We have a patent pending on the algorithm. It's a novel algorithm. But the AI itself isn't just, hey, let's put more data in, therefore we'll be more predictive. That actually doesn't work for wildfire because there's so few events that you can very easily overfit your model if you just put more and more data in. So what we do is we use AI to support the professors that we have on our team, the scientists we have on our team, to be able to predict science. But the whole, it's a sort of a Russian nesting doll of models. So we have, over 200 data layers that go into our AI algorithm. Each data layer is a full data set of California. Many of those are sub-tier models. One model, just as an example, is our own proprietary fire climate model. Many of those are proprietary sub-tier models for us. That model is based on hourly data for 11 years across all of California, the sort of massive data set. Through that, we've been able to figure out where can wind-driven fires happen and where can they not happen. There's a lot of areas that have not had a wind-driven fire that have those conditions very frequently. We just haven't had an ignition on a bad day. And there's other areas that look to the naked eye like it's vegetated, like it's forested, like paradise, but never see those conditions climatologically. So they actually cannot have a wind-driven fire and therefore are significantly more insurable, especially if you have mitigated homes. If you insure a home that is very safe in a wind-driven fire area, unfortunately, it doesn't really matter what you do to your home. It will be at risk of burning down. So it's really a giant tree of models that have been allowed us to be extraordinarily predictive. Every portfolio that we've put together has had a sub 10% loss ratio for wildfire, and that is only non-admitted home insurance California. That is created out of the business that everybody else is ignoring right now.
Okay, so yeah, so that's interesting. So you had this proof sort of fairly early on then that you were kind of being able to uncover kind of risk and sometimes non-risk in ways that just other people hadn't looked at.
Yeah, that's one of the big keys. So the way in which I look at climate adaptation is the fact that we sort of need a new solution in the industry. We've been using this third-party data model, selling a risk score to a generalist carrier for a very long time. And in a static environment, absolutely that works. We don't live in a static environment. 3 out of the last 5 years in California have had a new type of wildfire behavior. Generalist carriers using third-party data models very understandably look at the model, the service provider, and say, hey, we need multiple years of loss history in market in order for you to justify any changes. And I'm not talking about underlying data feed updates. That every model should have that, of course. I'm talking about whole-scale changes to look at the model and restructure whether or not it's actually predictive or not. That sort of thing, generalist carriers should feel that way, right? Because it's not their own model. And if the third-party data model does it incorrectly, the carrier is all of a sudden a much higher risk. But that creates multiple years iteration cycle. And in a world where wildfire itself is evolving at a very rapid rate, that multiple year iteration cycle means these models will be out of date. So because of that, right? Because climate change is not just making catastrophes more destructive. It is evolving catastrophes at a far faster rate than ever before. Because of that, there needs to be a different solution. So we are a vertically integrated catastrophe modeling, climate modeling house, vertically integrated into an insurance provider. And that allows us to stay on top of the risk as soon as it changes.
Yep. And how's the business been developing? Because you started in 2017, did it take you a little while to kind of get the first uptake for this, or how is that going?
Yeah, so our modeling has always been of significant interest in the industry, which makes a lot of sense. For creating our MGA, it takes a bit of time, as it sort of should in a lot of ways, to work with reinsurers to sort of see what we can do in terms of profitability. We work with groups and ask them to put millions of dollars on the line for us to create a profit. But after doing this for a number of years, the uptake has been accelerating pretty significantly. So at this point, we have 6 different programs in California with 6 different capacity providers, not one-to-one. Many of them are on multiple, but giving us significant capacity to be able to insure homes and commercial properties in California.
Yeah, and the partnership with Avanta Ventures. I mean, how is that kind of? Are you working closely then with the parent corporation, CSAA, and?
Yeah, there's CSAA and Delos have been close for a bit of time. Obviously, they are absolute experts at home insurance in California, and we are looking to make a fairly significant impact in the market that is underserved right now. So Avanta has a lot of expertise, a lot of experience, a lot of established roots all across California. An incredible customer base, but also people that understand insurance very, very deeply. So it's been a very beneficial relationship for Delos, being able to learn from them, partner with them, work with them in a lot of different ways. And we see it sort of very simply as a value add on both sides, especially with their establishment in our wildfire capabilities.
We're getting a couple of questions in, which is great. Please do keep them coming. We'll get to some of the more general ones in a minute, but I thought I'd pop one in for you, Kevin, here, because I think it seems relevant. It's from Diksha Sethi, who says, do you see a difference in pricing models or catastrophic modeling solutions overall with the trends?
It's a really good question. And Diksha, I see that you also asked a question about admitted versus non-admitted. So let me sort of talk about those in combination overall with the trends. Yeah, so there's been, our model is future predictive. And that's kind of why the admitted, non-admitted, and pricing models sort of tie in together. We have, so that sub-tier model that I mentioned is the fire climate model. We take that model, and that's input into the AI algorithm, but then we modify it by different climate predictions, looking at 1 year, 5 year, 10 years, more. All those are independent inputs into the AI algorithm. The concept is we are smoothing our view of risk into the future. With every admitted model right now, because of the restrictions that are implemented by the Department of Insurance, you are stuck predicting the past, right? You have to use previous data to be able to look at a view of risk in the future. And in a lot of ways, that is, again, part of the old solution, the static environment. Take 60 years of loss history and use that as a prediction for the loss history of the next year. That doesn't work under a climate-affected era. So yeah, I strongly believe that the future of insuring properties in climate-affected areas will include climate predictions as at least a small part, if not a large part of those models. And therefore, the solution at this point will be non-admitted in the market until we're able to see some sort of change on the regulatory aspect. I think the original purpose behind the regulatory decision made sense. It's non-discriminatory, right? They can check to make sure it's non-discriminatory. But in an era that is affected by climate change the way it is right now, there needs to be updates on that side as well.
Okay, great. Look, we'll and I think we'll come to some of those more general questions in a little bit. I'd love to make sure we have time to get Matt to jump in here. So thanks for that, Kevin. I think it gives us a good sense of kind of what's becoming possible. And I think we can do a little bit more on that. But turning to Matt. So tell us a little bit, about Salient Predictions and what it is that how it works.
I guess a little bit of context, maybe personally, professionally, and then I'll share a bit on the company. So at a super high level, what we're doing at Salient is we're looking at the coming weeks and months and predicting weather in that time frame, right? So this is obviously different than the hours of days of a typical weather provider, or some of the work that's being done on sort of long-term time understanding what is 5, 10, 20% future. The way I came to this was interesting. I had spent I came on board as a CEO and co-founder of Salient about a year ago. And prior to this, I spent a little over 4 years at a large climate risk analytics company called Jupiter Intelligence, where I led business development, was the first employee there. So I worked a lot in the insurance sector, really helping them think about sort of those long-term planning decisions. They were being pressured, as I think most of us know, by regulators and shareholders to quantify their physical risk of climate over time. What I realized at a certain point was that I wanted to start getting more into the heart of the insurance business. In other words, thinking about, what Steve, for example, mentioned around risk selection, right? A lot of the work that we were doing on the long term was around risk mitigation, but I thought that risk selection was a really important piece of the puzzle. And that's when I met Salient, and they were just doing some really interesting science in that sort of 2 to 52 week time frame. And seeing new levels of accuracy that hadn't been seen before in those kinds of models. I mean, we've all heard about, all of the terrible heat waves and the current drought situation in the States. You're seeing the Rhine River level lower than, we've seen it in decades, which is preventing barge traffic. There's all of these extremes that we can start to spot with the usage of machine learning and new science that's been developed by our company that we're super excited about. And I think a lot like Kevin has described with Delos, very science-oriented company, constantly have our pulse on sort of the new research. And you need that sort of integration into the scientific community, because if it's just training up machine learning models, as Kevin said rightly, you're going to overfit models. So you need that scientific intuition to really carefully sort of construct these models. But it's been really interesting. We're seeing accuracy metrics that are higher than anyone's ever seen in this time scale, which is that time scale that so many business decisions are made, right, in the coming weeks and months. So that's a little bit about what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder if you can, just walk us through, what is it that you're mostly measuring? Is it a number of things, or is it a kind of a few crucial things? It's mostly to do with measurements of sea data, right? Like ocean data, right? I'm saying that vaguely because I understand it's to do with, perhaps the salinity of the water and other things, but.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. At a high level, what we're looking at is we are predicting precipitation levels, temperatures, and wind speeds, right, at weeks and months into the future. The way that we started doing that as a company actually originated in one of my co-founders' science. He was a 40-year science veteran at the Woods Hole Institute near Boston. And if you think about sort of the water cycle 101, right, if you're looking at the salinity, the surface salinity level in the ocean at a specific location, and that salinity level is increasing from week to week, month to month, that tells you something, right? It tells you that there's more evaporation at that location. And of course, evaporation turns into moisture in the atmosphere, and that will precipitate down as rainfall somewhere, right? Either on ocean or on land, right? So when you think about that particular problem of just spotting an increase somewhere, an increase somewhere salinity, an increase somewhere in precipitation, you draw the spatial and the temporal connections between just that, what they call a teleconnection in the industry. It's beautifully set up for machine learning, right? But now think about really generalizing that approach to a bunch of other predictors. That's really what we've built at Salient. And once you have, sort of a good sense of precipitation, temperature, and wind, you can start to essentially verticalize those outputs into areas that we care about, right? Energy, agriculture, and actually at the nexus of energy and agriculture, there's a huge risk management / insurance business, which is probably most relevant to this particular conversation, which we're super excited about.
Yeah. And you've had, again, sort of, there's plenty of evidence of this, really allowing us to make those much more precise predictions than we were able to before. So, did that happen early on, and how long has it taken, I guess, to kind of prove it in the market and get people to trust it and buy into it?
It's a good question. So, where we first saw success was actually before I joined the company. It was a rainfall forecasting competition that we handily won. It was put on by the U.S. government. There were a bunch of academics. There were a bunch of private weather companies that were essentially repackaging NOAA and ECMWF models. And we beat them by a factor of 2. And that was a really promising, this was back in 2017, 18. So that was just really promising. And I think the industry took note of that forecast competition win. So that's precipitation. And we've sort of built on the foundation quite substantially of that model. And as I said, generalized to other measures as well. More recently, we've been spending a lot of time on temperature as well. And, of course, the heat wave, things like the Texas freeze 2021, how do we go from being completely reactive to those kinds of events and, where essentially most weather models give you a signal, 3 days, 7 days in advance, to being able to sort of spot a signal and understand the confidence of that forecast, right? A week, 2 weeks in advance. That's really interesting. And that gives, to that the whole idea of risk mitigation, it gives more time to react and prepare for those kinds of things. I mean, just think about the Texas freeze, right? If insurers and operators, energy operators had 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks, right, to prepare for those kinds of events, even if the signal wasn't like a 90% confidence, more like a 70 or 60% confidence, they could have done something, right? They could have simply insulated their pipes and eliminated hundreds of millions of dollars of damages and losses. So, that's the journey that we're on. And it impacts both the risk mitigation side of the equation, but also the risk selection side of the equation as well, because, there are sort of a growing number of insurance policies, many of which are parametric, that are in that sub 1 year sort of time scale. Agriculture is a perfect example that we're seeing a pretty steep increase year over year in.
Yeah. And is that a good taste of sort of how this, the company is likely to develop from here? As in, are you looking to kind of cover more verticals, or, add more different types of prediction? I mean, where will sort of almost technological development also take you, and what will become?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say on the business side, of course, as a startup, it's all about demonstrating quantifiable, outcomes for our customers. Right. And also staying very focused on the kinds of use cases and customer types that are most promising. So we see the quickest, largest market uptake in sort of the short and medium term. On the product side, it's challenging running a startup, right? I mean, we're constantly having to winnow down everything that our customers and prospects are asking for into a very scalable product that has broad general applicability to lots of customers and helps them make decisions. And then, of course, to your point on the science side, our goal as a company is to be the global standard in what we call sub-seasonal to seasonal, right? That 2 to 52 week time scale of weather forecasting. So that means for us internally running a really strong model improvement process where we're constantly updating the model, multiple times a year, as opposed to some of the big government agencies who are updating their models every 5 to 10 years. And it incorporates the latest science and ML techniques. So that's really important. And ultimately, that is a huge part of what's going to make our company successful and have people give them more confidence to move from a little bit of the status quo, which is when people are making decisions weeks and months in the future. Generally speaking, they're looking at historical data, right, as a proxy for what's going to happen in that coming week or month. But they've been literally burned so many times over the past 5 to 10 years, seeing these really wild swings. And it's so variable right now that a lot of them are just starting to make that switch into a forecasted view in that time scale.
Yeah, I know this is the one panel where you can actually say the words literally burned, and it's a horrible image. But yeah. So no, thank you for that. Cal,
may I jump in with I actually had a couple more questions to the entire panel here, but I see someone in the audience posed a very interesting question where they said basically the challenge is really lies in adopting new solutions that offset future risks, and we have to kind of find a way to incentivize the market to adopt pre-disaster sort of risk offsetting solutions. So what is everyone's take on how to inspire and incentivize stakeholders to adopt these sort of solutions? Both the investors and the startups on the panel. Who wants to jump in first? Steve?
When I hear the word marketplace, I immediately think about economic incentives. But insurance is a constrained ecosystem. There's a significant amount of regulatory oversight. Pricing is not fluid. And so certainly pricing going upwards. You can always offer discounts, and that is what carriers are doing, especially my carrier, in terms of if you mitigate risk around your properties, either at the individual or the community level, there's opportunities for discounting. But the challenge is, can you go the other way for areas that don't do that, and you can't. Or not in any reasonably time efficient way. So therein lies the challenge.
Okay, Peter, from the reinsurer's point of view, perhaps.
Yeah, I think Steve hit on the challenge there. I think we'd love to find a world in which we can find companies that are providing these adaptive solutions such that if you use this policy or technology, then you can potentially get a lower premium going forward. I think that's sort of something we'd like to see work its way into the business. But pricing and regulatory regimes are challenging to get through. So it's trying to understand things like that and ways we can work with startups to start partnering and bringing in that data into the mothership of Munich Re and figure out are there ways we can make the total risk mitigation cheaper or easier to adopt for the customer.
All right, and the view of the entrepreneurs.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think on the risk mitigation and tying that to premium, most are aware of the work that FM Global has done around that. I think that's a really nice example of being very prescriptive with customers. If you can do X, Y, and Z, we'll give you some sort of credit. That's a great retention vehicle, by the way, for customers as well. I also think, and I've seen, some forward-thinking primary insurers offer consulting services, right? I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the folks that are really working through this issue at corporations are the risk managers, right? The CEO turns to the risk managers and they have an insurance mindset. So, if you can provide the right kinds of consulting and data services to those particular individuals, that's really helpful. And by the way, for insurance firms that aren't doing that, I'll be a little controversial. They're likely getting intermediated by reinsurance firms, other smart primary insurance firms, consulting firms, startups. So, I think that's a really important service to be providing.
That's a fair point. Kevin?
Yes. So we actually have something very similar to that in the wildfire space. So we right now, in areas that are at sort of a medium risk to wildfire, we basically say, here are a list of things that if you are able to harden your home in these 3 ways, and it's very catered to each individual home or property. If you change your home in these 3 ways, change your building in these 3 ways, we'll give you insurance, or 2 or 5 or 15, rarely 15. In that, we are going to be more affordable than a lot of other groups out there because we're sort of looking at the real risk of it, which allows people to actually get a policy. We are putting the data together, the product together right now for actually a full suite catered risk mitigation service, where we do a full analysis of a home. We're insuring people that are in wildfire areas that are in the woods, and they really do care about the risk. There's a lot of people looking for information. They want to know, what is my evacuation route? What is my true risk? How can I actually protect my home? And so we're putting together the technology for launch. So I definitely think that's important. It's really good in a lot of ways because we are the one entity, the one industry on earth that's directly aligned with loss reduction and risk mitigation. And so being able to embrace that, and I think other carriers in California are starting to do that as well. So I think that's really good. I do want to flip this a little bit and say that there is a little bit of responsibility looking up instead of looking down as well on capital providers, capacity providers, reinsurers. Obviously, you're on the venture side, Peter, but I do think reinsurers, the way they look at it right now is they say, I only trust people that have a long track record of being profitable. If you look at climate affected risks, especially wildfire, they look at it right now and say, nobody's been profitable. So there's 0 people in the middle of that Venn diagram, 0 groups. Therefore, there's just people going uninsured right now, or ending up on fair plans for every state. And it kind of makes sense in that situation where you do have regulators jump in and try to limit the effect of that, which then sort of puts everybody at odds. And I'm not saying that's the direction of who started what. I'm just saying it puts us in a tough position. So I do think that looking at new climate solutions, I think reinsurers have more space to be able to do this than insurers. But I think everybody in the industry needs to try to figure out a way to be willing to sort of test out, maybe in a little tiny, less piloted area. A lot due diligence on an MGA is the same if you're writing, 300,000 in premium versus 30 million in premium. Well, the group that has 300,000 in premium doesn't have the same track record, so they don't have that data. So is there a way to start in a smaller way or do something that protects the reinsurer? Absolutely, which is incredibly important, and allows this technology to come into the industry, to get some traction, to sort of build on itself to the point where it can actually be a viable solution with a track record in the industry.
I wonder if it'd be fair to let Peter come. Do you have thoughts on that? Like, is the reinsurance industry, do you think, starting to think about things differently on that?
I mean, I think the reinsurance industry always is focused on kind of its, risk management as a whole and understanding, all these small changes that are going on within individual insurance units and things like that, and different insurance trends. I mean, Munich Re does both insurance on the primary side and reinsurance, so there's always a little bit of a deep look at all these different spaces. I think I can't speak for all of our businesses directly because there's thousands of them, but I think within the climate space, it all comes back to the same principles around, we're seeing these, the increasing frequency and severity. We're seeing the individual markets react. And then we've got working on a solution kind of together with our insurance partners and our reinsurance business to try to figure out how to better, move the needle in those areas where, things are really changing.
And I think, Peter, too, given the fact that Munich Re Ventures has been around for a while, Munich Re's really been on the early edge of adopting that sort of mentality of really looking at new technology. So your group has done a lot for the industry in a lot of ways. And early on in Insurtech, Munich Re was out there looking at this new technology.
Yeah, and I think thanks for that. And I'll say, the ethos or the philosophy at MRV is to sort of be this tip of the spear where we want to, go in and we do early investing. So we invested in Salient at the seed stage because we want to understand how all this is going to evolve and how we can be the best partner. So yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's core to understanding how all of this evolves and shakes out is being sort of there early and understanding how things are moving.
As a portfolio company of Peter's, with thousands of businesses within Munich Re, they've done a great job in terms of creating the connectivity to, sort of the initial businesses that matter for us. And, that will change over time. And, we're excited to be along for the ride with a group that's, forward thinking with respect to the kind of stuff we're doing.
Now we're almost closing in on time, but I think, Cal, you had a question.
Just one very brief one, and probably the most inconvenient one. Given the sort of inevitable downturn we seem to be heading into, will the Insurtech valuations hold up in such a downturn? And I think it's a particularly interesting question because a higher interest rate environment is not necessarily a bad thing for the insurance business. So by premising that, I want to know the perspectives of both the entrepreneurs first and then the investors, very briefly.
I can start. We raised our seed round with Munich Re and others in May, and it was at a fair valuation. Obviously, there are some pockets of the venture world where we're seeing, decreased deal flow. I think that what the conversation we're having today, if it's not Insurtech, it also, as the slide before showed, it's in that climate tech space. And in particular, there's a lot of venture money, a lot of people that are channeling money through those sort of theses right now, which I think Delos and Salient squarely sort of fit into. So, I mean, of course, even if we do see downturns in the climate investment space, which I don't think we will, there's the good companies are always in short supply, and I think they'll be, the fluctuations will be muted a little bit, with the best companies out there.
All right, Kevin, your perspective?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things, two different factors at play here. First of all, the market downturn, which is affecting everybody, and it's going to affect valuations. I have my own personal opinions that are, of course, very biased, that, if you're investing in an early stage company, they're not going to exit during this downturn unless the downturn lasts 8 years. So why are the valuations affected? But I get it. That's the market, right? The other aspect of it is the recent IPOs that didn't necessarily work out. And I think what's important, to Matt's point, there's a lot of other investors out there looking at good companies. And so I think Insurtech investors need to be very specific of saying, is this company similar to that group that did not work out? Or is it similar to a whole bunch of other startups that did work out recently? There's a lot of acquisition successes recently. There's public companies in Kinsale and Palomar that are doing very well right now, comparative to the market. And so looking at a group, ask yourself, are they more similar to one of those ones that didn't work out, or are they more similar to something like Kinsale and Palomar or some other comparative company? Because there will be other investors that can look at that and aren't necessarily just saying, oh, Insurtech valuations overall are affected by those few examples when, those same venture funds said 4 years ago, hey, I don't know if the underlying metrics are there in those companies. We'll, say one thing consistently, right? And I think that Matt's right. The venture world are good at picking winners, and there will be money there for groups that are good investments.
All right, then let's hear from the corporate part of the venture world. So then, Peter.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that the Insurtech world often gets looked at as sort of a monolith, but when you kind of peel back the layers a little bit, there are a ton of different business models that have different risk profiles, and whether you're holding the risk as an, whether you're taking on the risk directly, whether you're being an MGA, whether you're an enabler providing tools for Insurtech, or whether you're going after the big guys. I think there's all a different, those have their own sort of different headwinds and tailwinds. I think what's really interesting about the set of companies we're talking about right now is climate is in a league of its own right now with the amount of tailwinds that are coming into the sector, both from regulation like the IRA, from this whole new world of investors that have a lot of dry powder and long timelines and commitments to funding climate focused companies, and then participation from corporates and governments and the general population in addressing the climate challenge. I think that's a big area of tailwind for companies in this Insurtech space that have these solutions and visions to go after the climate problem. Now, that doesn't mean you can be an Insurtech and slap, climate or some green coloring around your name, and all of a sudden you get looked at as a climate tech company. It all comes down to what's your core business, what solutions are you providing to the market, and is the market ready to adopt those? And so I think there's a good benefit in climate focused Insurtechs that is there and here to stay. At the same time, it's just still understanding the core business and what kind of Insurtech are you that will impact the valuations as well.
Fair enough, Steve.
I agree with everybody here. From a Delta perspective, maybe more at the macro level, Insurtech has been a little bit behind fintech in terms of solving the problems for their industry. So I firmly believe there's a lot of opportunity and upside for startups in the space. Looking at the markets, unfortunately, a lot of the public Insurtechs that went out did not have defensible unit economics and business models that made sense, and suffered for that. And we're seeing roughly 70% off the highs for the space. That being said, I think that's going to impact later stage Insurtechs that also have the similar business models that didn't do well. But earlier stage companies, precisely maybe in the areas that Peter was talking about, people that are enablers, that have technologies that are defensible, and business models around that, should do fine. I think probably all of us were at the Insurtech Connect conference in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago. There were 9,000 attendees there. It was the biggest event they've had at that conference, COVID or no COVID. And I have full faith that there's a lot of innovation coming up in the Insurtech space that will continue to do well, both in terms of market traction and from investment return perspectives.
All right, wonderful optimistic note to finish on.
Yeah, we're right out of time, so we have to do our final notices, I'm afraid.
Now, I'm starting with this slide because actually Matt and Kevin asked me to share it specifically with their contact info, so that anyone watching this this webinar live and then the recorded version could get in touch with them. So feel free to take a screen grab of it now. And as I mentioned, the webinar will be made available on the GCV website probably in the next 24 to 48 hours or so. Of course, GCV is very much known in the community for the events and conferences that we sort of put together. And here's the list of some of the upcoming ones. So on October 25th, 26th, we're going to be in Sao Paulo with Corporate Venture in Brazil. Then in November, we have the GCV Asia International Delegation to Japan, scheduled for the 14th to 16th of November. Going into next year, of course, we are going to have our flagship GCVI Summit in Monterey, California on March 15th and 16th. And of course, then the GCV Symposium in London, scheduled for June 20th and 21st. And a few words from Maya now about the following webinar from our Next Wave series.
Yeah, this is just to say that if you enjoyed this webinar, then join us, in November, on November 9th, same time of day. And this is more of a webinar around the kind of professional development side of corporate venturing. So it's a provocative title, Who Has the Harder Job, VC or CVC? But this is a way in just really to kind of tease out some of the particular skill sets that you need to be a good CVC investor, as opposed to being on the financial side. I'm sure that Steve and Peter could probably give chapter and verse on the particularly delicate maneuvers that they need to do with internal stakeholder management and all the rest of it. So we're going to dive into that, and we'd love to hear you, have you join us for that one as well.
Yes, and if you would like to get in touch with me or with Maya, please feel free to do so, reaching us via email. And you can also take a screen grab of this particular slide. So once again, a very, very big thank you to Maya and to the panelists for the insightful discussion today. Thank you very much all once again. Have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be in the world, and goodbye.